Okie dokie. Let's get to some headlines. And again, if you're here for Sam Houston talk, we've got a whole bunch of it in a little bit. We want to make sure we give it its due. So we didn't want to lump it in with other important things. But Shahan, I'm glad you're here because I want to talk about there were two moves over the weekend in the wide receiver ranks that could be relatively impactful, I would say, for the two programs. The first is that Shadrack Banks has landed. Of course, the Galena Park North Shore star and Texas A&M signee who announced that he was transferring soon after, pretty much right after spring football. He announced he was transferring. He has landed at TCU as Gary Patterson reels in the 4-star prospect out of Galena Park North Shore. I mean,
so
yeah,
here,
go ahead.
Let me jump in for 1 second. According to the Athletics Sam Kahn,
our friend Sam Kahn,
well-dressed Sam Kahn, the well-dressed Sam Kahn, who all of us aspire to, of course, apparently no longer a wide receiver.
That is interesting.
Apparently going to be playing linebacker at TCU.
Now, one thing I think is now he's a guy who is always a stout wide receiver.
Yes.
Great speed, but
he's
always
a big boy.
He's a big boy. He's a big boy with an eye. And so moving him to linebacker, I would be very interested in talking with John Kay at North Shore and getting a feel for, do you think this transition could go well? I will say this. He's always seemed like a pretty smart player, and he's always seemed like a pretty good athlete, and those seem like the kind of things that would translate well to moving to linebacker. Furthermore, doesn't Gary Patterson just get the benefit of the doubt whenever he's like, this guy's a defender and he can be a star?
Yeah. The thing that I'll say about Gary Patterson's defense is, okay, so they run a 4-2-5 for people who kind of don't know. You know, you're playing with two linebackers who are asked to do a whole lot, right? They're asked to step back in coverage. They're asked to rush the passer. They're asked to clog up the middle of the field. Obviously, physically, Shadrack Banks will be able to do all of that. The other thing that I'll say about Gary Patterson's linebackers is very few of the players who Gary Patterson comes to TCU with start out as linebackers. Mm-hmm. He's primarily moving guys, usually from safety. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not usually from wide receiver, but you know, this is a program that is used to teaching guys how to play linebacker. And so you look at Garrett Wallow, just picked in the NFL draft, of course. He came in as a safety, right? I believe D. Winters came in as a safety. This is common. And sometimes you also have it go the other way, where you get maybe these lanky defensive line prospects who they move back. So this is a program that knows how to teach linebackers. It's critical to kind of the development of their defense that they do that. And I think you look physically. I mean, it's really interesting to me more than anything that Shadrack Banks kind of decided this quick that I'm okay not playing wide receiver, because you'd imagine that there would be a lot of programs that kind of said, look, you know, you were a great wide receiver in high school at North Shore, obviously. Maybe you can do it at the college level. Maybe we need you at tight end. Maybe we need you on defense. Maybe we need you somewhere else. Obviously, A&M gave him the ability to play at wide receiver. So I think that it's interesting, obviously, that he made the decision to go there, even though he won't play wide receiver. But I think for him, this is a great move for his development, in my opinion. I think that you look at the game of football, look, all due respect, receivers are a dime a dozen, right? Yeah. To be a really good linebacker, somebody who obviously has the ability to get after it, to step back in coverage, I think that's a great win for him, and I think it's going to do wonders for his long-term development.
Does that also say that, is it Gary saying you're just going to make a fantastic linebacker and we have to put you there, or is it the fact that maybe TCU has a better core of wide receivers than we were anticipating too?
Yeah, I think that they probably see where he can be long-term, right? I think that they kind of see, because I don't think Shadrack Banks, either at linebacker or receiver, is going to be a legit day one contributor, right? Whether at either position. I do think that they have some talent at wide receiver, and you know, so I do think that it makes sense that he wouldn't necessarily be a day one contributor there. I do think he could get on the field potentially quicker at wide receiver, but I think that you just look at Banks and you look at what Gary Patterson's done with linebackers. I think that he knows. Look, I mean, we've had players come through this program that were picked in the first and second rounds, you know, and I think that if you're Shadrack Banks, you know, maybe you could have considered that playing at Texas A&M. Maybe you could have considered changing positions. But I do think at the same time, I mean, this is a program that is built in a lot of ways around their linebackers and their safeties. And I think that there's no better place to get development than at TCU.
It's a pretty darn good get there for TCU. Regardless of where they play him, he was such a star at North Shore that he will be, I'm sure, put in a position to succeed there at TCU. So that was one big headline wide receiver transfer. The other one comes via North Texas. The Mean Green have hauled in an SEC receiver, and that is Tommy Bush, the Schertz-Clemens star who went off to Georgia, played for Kirby Smart. I think he ends up with a grand total of like 3 catches or something. He battled injuries the whole time. Now, I will say this, but he's transferring to North Texas. I will say this. Talk about a guy who's got his life straightened out. He got his degree from Georgia in 3 years, and now he's going to go and get a master's at North Texas. That seems like a pretty good deal there for Tommy Bush. Like, off the field, obviously he would have preferred to be playing football, but he will go to North Texas, and a guy who was, I believe, a 4-star coming out of Sherrod Clemens. He was a star.
So thinking back a little, okay, people who know me obviously know that I went to Baylor and have been around that program for a while. When Tommy Bush was getting recruited, it was down to Georgia and Baylor. I mean, and the thing that always kills you, being one of these in-state schools is he would have been the best player in Baylor's class. He was the 11th best player in Georgia's class, right? That's just the sort of thing where it's like, man, I know they do a good job. With George Pickens right now at Georgia, he's going to be potentially a first or second round NFL draft pick. So they do a great job over there. I see why people pick him, of course. But, man, it's killer to lose a kid like that out of state. But, he was a really highly rated prospect coming out of Schertz Clemens. I mean, one of the top receivers in the state of Texas. Again, I think he was a borderline top 200 type player coming out of high school. To get a kid like that at North Texas, especially, you're losing Jalen Darden this year, obviously. You lost a couple other kids to transfers. They're high on Jair Shorter. I know that that's a guy who they think is going to be a star very, very soon. But to add a kid like Tommy Bush to that room, a big, lanky, physical kid, somebody who can definitely win on the outside. I think a lot of North Texas' better returning receivers are going to play inside. I think that's just a huge win for this program. And we saw, last year, North Texas has good wide receivers, but this is another level of player, right? You lose a Jalen Darden. You want to be adding a Tommy Bush, along with, again, a Jair Shorter, who was out a lot of last year due to injuries. And so I think this just adds so much to the depth of the room. It really spreads it out. I think it's a new skill set to the room is the other thing, too. And I think that if you've looked at North Texas' most successful teams, they have those multiplicity of receivers, right? They have different types of receivers who some can go long, some can go short, some can, be these underneath guys. Michael Lawrence obviously being one of those types of guys. And I think that adding a Tommy Bush to this room, I think it's going to make everybody in the room better. And on top of that, whether it's obviously Asinani, who we think right now is going to be the starting quarterback, or if it's Jace Ruder, who's coming in from North Carolina, I think it's going to give him, whichever one it is, a tremendous safety blanket to have a player like Tommy Bush on the outside.
If he can get healthy, you know what I mean?
Yes.
If he can
They
stay
need
healthy, nobody's ever said anything about his skill set. That's not in question. The only question is whether or not he can stay on the field, and if he can, then that's a big boost to that North Texas receiving core.
I think he'll add a lot on leadership too. Just a guy who's super driven off the field. I think that with all the uncertainty at quarterback that they went through last year and this upcoming year, it's like they need that Jalen Darden type leadership as well.
Yeah, and the other thing that I'll mention is that I'm not going to pretend that I followed his transfer, all recruitment, all that closely, but. I think that whenever you have a kid come from a school like Georgia, one of these big-time SEC schools, he can land somewhere, right, in the Power 5 if he wanted to, right? Whether it's he could have ended up at an Oregon State or, just one of those types of schools, where you'll get a chance. I think that it says a lot about a kid to look at what he wants and what will fit him best. And I think that, with Tommy Bush coming back to the Metroplex, coming back to the state of Texas, of course, in an offense that is very wide receiver friendly when it's rolling, and obviously a chance to be back, to be in the Metroplex, be back in the state of Texas, not too far from home. I think that this is really a good fit for him both on and off the field, and I think that it says a lot about a player, like you mentioned, when they graduate so quickly, when they have options in front of them, to be able to make a decision that's right for them. And in a lot of ways, we have to see what it does on the field, but I think for Tommy Bush, in a lot of ways, this was the right decision.
So that's obviously big news from the college front. We're going to get back in the college front here in just a moment to talk about, I guess, some other thing that happened. But a couple other headlines from across the state. There, believe it or not, there are still coaching changes going on in the high school ranks. Arlington Lamar has hired. They have hired Billy Skinner, the coach from Irving MacArthur. He will move from the Cardinals to go take over the Vikings. He is a Lamar alum. He was an assistant at Lamar. He was the defensive coordinator there from 2015 and 2019. Now he's going to go be their head coach, taking over for Laban DeLay. Of course, Laban DeLay took off for where did he end up at?
Delay ended up at
South Grand Prairie.
Yes, which is in the same district.
Correct. Yes. So that was
Yeah, he transferred over districts, which is
Little spicy.
always interesting. There's a couple of those this year.
breaking news coming down from Matt Stepp. A couple of news. Levelland will have another coach.
The Fighting Matt Wilson.
Yes, the Fighting Matt Wilson. I already texted him and said it's time for you to go home.
Yeah. Hey, bud, your calling card
Andy,
is here.
Andy Carell will not return for a third season, so Levelland is looking for a new head coach and athletic director, from what I understand, according to Matt Stepp, our high school football insider. And finally, Fort Worth Polytechnic has opened. Jeff Green has resigned his post. He's going to become the offensive coordinator at Crowley, where he's got a tight relationship with J.J. Resendez, the coach over there at
That's not same district.
No, I don't believe so. I would need to look that up, but off the top of my head, I don't think so. But they are. He was the offensive coordinator for South Hills when J.J. Resendez was there, and if you remember, that was one of the best offenses in the state, and so they're hoping to kind of relight that fire there at Crowley. But Fort Worth Polytechnic, the Parrots, are looking for a new head coach. And then finally, there was 7-on-7 this weekend.
A lot of it.
A dozen tournaments. A dozen tournaments from across the state at the Westwood Warriors SQT. Lake Travis and College Station have qualified by virtue of there. At the Arlington SQT, Denton Geyer and Little Elm are into the state tournament there in College Station. At the Cy Creek SQT, Katie Tompkins and Cy Woods make it into punch their ticket to College Station. In the Division II ranks, Needville is in. They beat Navasota in the finals of the Roughnecks SQT. Roughnecks. Where was that? Hold on. Let me look this up. Let's see if I can figure it out by looking at it. Roughnecks. West Columbia? I don't know. I'm getting distracted.
Reel it back in.
The Graham SQT, Breckenridge and Melissa are through to College Station. At the Houston CES SQT, Silsby and El Campo qualified. Hitchcock wins their own tournament. They win the SQT by beating Hampshire Finette. They are through. West Columbia. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did I say that? I think I said that.
You did.
Good job. Fredericksburg SQT, it is Somerset and Wimberley who are through. Paris, the SQT. Kaufman beats Terrell in overtime to make it to the College Station. And down in Division III at the Buffalo SQT, Hearn and Gunner are into the SQT, or into the state tournament. The Stamford SQT out west, it was Dublin and Hawley. The Rice Raiders SQT, East Bernard, and Tidehaven. East
Pretty
Bernard.
chalky.
Pretty chalky. This is a lot of teams that we see every year in College Station.
I was going to say, I think that this upcoming week will be when stuff starts shifting a little bit more.
I would say so. This is the first big weekend of state qualifying tournaments, so I would say no real surprises there. This week will probably be the week that we get any sort of surprises.
We'll be out at Grapevine.
There are some headlines from across the state. You'll be on Grapevine.
I will.
I won't.
Mallory, myself, and our Great White North friend will be back in Texas for the first time since leaving us.
Matt Stepp will be back, so there's all that.